Good evening. Welcome to the Fright Files. My name is Chris Harmon, but you can call me Dr. Fright because tonight we have a very special show planned for you. Tonight we will be taking a look at one of the most horrifying folklores and myths in American legend. Tonight we will dive into the mysteries of the black-eyed children. For those who don't know who the black-eyed children are, just to give you a little background, the black-eyed kids are a folklore phenomenon of people having strange encounters with kids whose eyes are entirely black, who insist upon entering their vehicle or home, and whom seem to ooze an overwhelming sense of fear and panic. As a fan, you may think, is this really true? We have selected stories here tonight where you, the audience, can be the decision maker. Are these stories real? Or is the black-eyed kids just a phenomenon? Now, before we dive deep into this subject with our first story, as always, I need you to ask yourself that one important question. Can you withstand till the end? And I want to thank everybody in the chat who is already here enjoying this frightful fest. Hello to everybody. Welcome to the Fright Files. Let's begin with our first terrifying tale. I call this story The Midnight Caller. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months, and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything: our roommates, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her nothing was there. Yes, it sounded a bit silly, but what it was, we do with our daughter. When she gets scared, I figure it should work with a puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate, blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped towards me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temperature. She whimpered almost like she was afraid and barking and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the people and I can't explain what I looked. why I looked, but I did. And outside were two kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be 16 or 17, said the witness. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a slight shade of honey blonde, and she wore it long, about mid back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and a thin looking olive colored pullover style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl who looked to be around 3, maybe 4, in the same style, jeans, and a button down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor, shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back in ponytail. She had a stuffed toy under her free arm, and it wasn't identical to the one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been feeling Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in a given the same sum. I would have asked these children and given them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about them seemed off at this point. I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the door or grumbled. Nothing. I had turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators. I wasn't at the door. The older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted down, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." Before I stood there frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that wasn't when I saw her eyes. That was when I saw her eyes that weren't there, black eyed. The reason I couldn't see through them, they were black, solid black, maybe a midnight blue. As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I had never been one to believe in these things as a stonk and thesis and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I had written off many a ghost stories from friends and family members, eager to tell their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black eyed kid. There was no question. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step the tone changed. At first, she seemed polite. When I took the second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If you wanted to do that, if we wanted to do that, we would have broken in." "I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the back door and inched towards the backwards. Through something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back towards the door. It wasn't a physical pulling so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door, once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them that the black eyed children can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still feel ill. I still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it wasn't just a dream. He kept telling me to forget it. But this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, this tells me otherwise. Now, for those listening to this frightful tale, you see, the black eyed kids are almost always described in the same way. Children between the ages of 6 and 16, pale skin, completely black eyes, and out of date or strange clothing, while their black eyes make them look strange. What generally frightens people isn't their appearance, but the sudden presence of an overwhelming feeling of terror that accompanies the children. I hope you enjoyed our first story of the black eyed children. And now I want to go to the chat room and say hi to everybody in the comments. Hello to Shane, who is watching and listening to these frightful tales. We will be joined here by Madam Mina in a matter of moments, as she will also tell us a few frightful tales of the unknown. And in just a few seconds, we will begin our second story of the evening. As we begin our second story of the evening, I have to warn everybody as each story progresses, things will get a little bit more frightful. Let's take a deep dive into story number 2 as we go deeper into the black eyed children. This next story is called The Bus Encounter. Now, what makes this story so unique and so frightful isn't the fact that people claim to see the black eyed children. What makes the story so frightful, and you're about to find out. Now, then ask yourself, would you be willing to take a bus ride and take a chance of encountering what the witness in the story encountered? As she states, I was riding the bus back home after work. It was about 1 a.m. I'm a security guard and often work odd hours. So I'm sitting there, and this guy gets on, sits across from me. He was wearing a suit, had a briefcase, regular looking guy in his 20s. But what struck me about him at first was that he was chewing a cigar, not smoking it. You can't smoke on the bus. So I was just looking at him while he stared out the window, chewing his cigar, and all of a sudden he turned and looked at me. His eyes were pitch black, just as you described. My heart started beating like a mad son of a gun, and I felt my gore rising. I was starting to panic, and I had no idea why. I was just pants shifting, terrified of the sky. Then he grinned at me, and his teeth were all covered in tobacco bits and brown juice. The cigar clamped between them. I almost screamed, but instead I had the presence of mind to just get up and take the seat right next behind the driver. I calmed down a bit, and after that, but I kept an eye on this guy. He ended up chatting with some girl that got on, and they were starting to talk when I got off. I later convinced myself he was just trolling me, having fun with a pair of contacts. Now I wonder. And this next story that you're about to hear again goes deeper into the realm of the black eyed children. You see, folks, with each story you're hearing, first hand encounters of witnesses that have claimed to have seen the black eyed children. As with this next encounter, the witness says, I never heard of black eyed children before. My incident, so I come on here to post. And the witness says, I'm by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. And also, I don't believe in the paranormal. Ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me this Halloween. I have to admit, it has my stomach scratching, my head scratching. Witness says this is my first post on Reddit, and sorry to say, I've never even heard about black eyed children until yesterday. He posted this day after Halloween. I told my best friend about my incident, and she's an avid reader of non sleep, and she told me if I didn't post it, she would. So here I am. I hope you like it. And this is the witness's story. So it had been a slow trick or treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in our in ours and in ours and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 to 10 group of kids come by the entire night. Here it is about 9:30 p.m. My husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly actual events. But like I said, I don't believe in that stuff. But I do like good ghost stories now and then, and it was Halloween. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over a half hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light on and let our dog, Chloe, out of her gate. Chloe is an American bulldog, and it was very docile, and it was very tame, very kind, and polite. We only put her in that crate because we're afraid she'd try to get out to play in the middle of the night with all the kids. I don't want to have to chase after her in the wee hours, especially down the street. Also, we don't want her to scare any of the kids because she could be a little bit larger. So I turned the outside lights off and let Chloe out. She followed me to the back porch. It was getting close to 10 p.m. My husband decided he'd had enough for fun for one night and was going to go upstairs to go to bed and take a shower beforehand. After all, it was Thursday and he still had to get up early the next day for work. My teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so. So that left me alone on this night with our dog Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone now, watching, I have to say, was kind of on edge. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water and shower go off. I heard a knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the heck? It's almost 10 o'clock. Go home. But soon as an uneasy feeling came over me, why the knock so late? Our doorbell glows and in the dark. Our doorbell glows in the dark and without porch light. It wasn't it would be extra obvious to anyone there. So I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door had a big beveled glass panel, and anybody in their right mind would use the door or doorbell. So as the witness begins to tell the story further, I couldn't really just ignore the sounds of the knocking at our front door. Again, I heard knock, knock, knock from the front door, so I glanced down at Chloe, our dog, and she was gone. My gaze followed her unusual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there, as she normally does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room, but and could not find. I stood up to look around the room better and found her crouched by the back door, like wanting out. However, she never asked to go out that late at night, or even like that in that predicament. She always comes and licks my hand and puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say, heightened my anxiety. I called her name, Chloe. She just turned back to look at me, like, hell no, lady, I ain't moving. I yelled up to my husband, but he was already in the shower, and I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. The same sound come again. About that time, a car drove down the street, casting enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouette of two small children through the glass. I initially felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbors on their way home. I wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. So I headed to the door and looked back to make sure that Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself, as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door. Sure enough, I could see through the glass that there was a couple of pretty small kids, a little late for such young ones. I thought. I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could see, and there it was. Struck me immediately as odd. Kids were not wearing any costumes. They were in normal street clothes, and also no customary trick or treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl, blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, as our lights are from high above and on columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger, about a foot shorter, I'd say 8 or 9, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up. Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom? As she spoke with something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody ask to use my home phone. This was where things really got weird. Both kids turned to look at one another like they were going to say something to one another, but neither even spoke. They both turned back to me, and the girl said, Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared. Now I have to admit, there was two compelling features going on inside me. The first that a mother's heart, the first that of a mother's heart that wants to help these two small children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during the short conversation, I had already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of. Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself? Another pause, and they again looked at one another. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said, Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mom? And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer towards the door. She was going to just walk in. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. My motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror. I don't think I've ever felt in my life the fear I had at that moment. I could feel every hair on my arm and my back and my neck standing on end. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded, Please, ma'am, please. We're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us. Then, like one cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when fear took over and I shut and locked the door. I'll call your mom if you give me the number, I shouted through the door. But I'm not letting you in my house. I could see them stand there on the porch just staring at me through beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. They would have freaked me out even more to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but probably only a few seconds, I decided I'd call my neighbor that lived across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to use my phone, I glanced at the back door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found the dog in the guest room under the bed when I got to my phone and started to look for his contact info. It was only then the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the streets. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went. Still not calling my neighbor. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in. I could see the kids were still standing under the street lamp nearest my house, staring at me as I lifted the phone to my ear after calling. Only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met our neighbor out under the lamp, and once he was there, the kids were nowhere to be seen. As the witness says, I don't believe in any of this stuff and never even heard about the black eyed kids. But what I have to think is these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this, to portray such a eerie group of kids, they did a really good job. They scared the crap out of me and my dog Chloe. That was our second story of the Black Eyed Kids. Stay with us as we begin our third story in just a matter of moments. And remember, each story we tell gets deeper and deeper. And I want to say hello as we welcome Madam Mina to the stage. Good evening, Madam Mina.
Hello.
We have been telling stories of first-hand encounters with the black-eyed kids, and I understand you also have a story to tell here tonight, or two, or even three.
Yes, I do. Um, my first story is a Skinwalker story, and this was submitted to the Skinwalker subreddit by Yoon Giro, and it's titled Personal Skinwalker Story from 2017. First time poster on this sub. I've been holding on to this story for a couple of years. Um, I've been holding on to this story for a number of years since every so often there's a good time to tell it. I felt that I should finally post it and get people's thoughts on it. I'd like to apologize in advance, as I'd like to think I'm a decent storyteller in person, but pretty lackluster, long winded with text. Also, as I write about it later, I try and use animal noises to describe some sounds. Take them all with a grain of salt, as even I know there's not the exact thing I heard, but the closest sound I can relate to or describe it with. I go between I and we a couple of times, as I describe at the end. My friends and I all discussed what happened to confirm that we all, in fact, heard the same thing and had the same experience. To preface the story and where it takes place, I grew up in the Huron region of Ontario. For those not familiar, it's about a 3-hour drive directly west from Toronto, where I live now, on the shore of Lake Huron, not far from the area the tales not far from the area the tales of the Black Donnellys are The tale of the Black Donnellys are for you dark history lovers. Never heard that one before. The Black Donnellys, if anyone knows about that. During my time in high school, there was one teacher who had talked about his experiences in a small forested place called Lob's Bush. Although I wasn't very familiar with it at the time, it was known by a fair number of locals as a very haunted place in the area where people have had unexplainable but startlingly similar encounters. This teacher was very outspoken about his experience in that bush, but also his steadfast trust in being a non believer in the paranormal and supernatural, which in turn made him, of all people, the most fascinating to hear it from. Always ends his stories or answers questions with, I don't believe it. I can't explain it. I'm just telling you what happened. A few years later, in the winter of 2017, both after having him as my teacher in high school and having since moved away to attend my first year of university, I came back to my hometown for my winter break to spend some time with family and catch up with my friend group. For anyone familiar with the small town experience, our favorite activity was the age old classic of buying a terrible number of cheap reservation cigarettes, hopping on one of our friends' terribly rundown beater cars, and then smoking, chatting, and playing the worst music ever conceived until the smoke until the smoke or the gas tanks run out. We were all hovering around 16 to 18, so this was just the most fun, degenerate things we could do. On top of finally having a break from all my university coursework, this was the first time seeing friends in a couple of months, so we were all excited to be one big group again. I won't bore you with all the earlier antics of the evening, But where this story picks up is after driving around, catching up for a few hours, we pit stop at a random bush trail so some of us could smoke more. As we started walking down one of the trails, I remember feeling a very stark change in the atmosphere around us. I didn't really want to express my feelings to ruin the mood, but I definitely felt the need to be on high alert. I never had a way to describe the physical feeling apart from my chest feeling heavy, but somehow it was very clear that something was watching us and did not want us there. Every few steps, I needed to look back to make sure something wasn't stalking us. All we had were our phone flashlights, which had a very short distance. The way the trail sat in the bush, it was all new trees, so they curled up over the path to almost form a tunnel. It looked as if we had walked into the maw of a massive creature, slowly making our way down its throat. One second. Oh, 1 second. Sorry.
Dr. Fright is very pleased, Madam Mina.
This is kind of out of order. Okay, we only made it about a few hundred meters before realizing that right the calm night was turning into a winter storm. We all agreed to go back to the car and would start making our way home before it got any worse. By the time we made it back to the car, the trees were swinging wildly in the wind, and the snow made it hard to see a couple of feet in front of us.
All right, very good, Madam Mina.
Sorry, I'm not done yet. After walking further down the trail, we finally came to an opening. On the right side of the trail, the trees had parted out to showcase the edge of the field, nicely lit by the moonlight. On the left side of the bush, On the left side, the bush clears out, so there is a lovely section of grass and foliage parting to show a small stream cutting through. It looked like a naturally made auditorium with the stream cutting through like the main walkway, sparse trees, so plenty of seating for an audience, and the trees opening leading down into the farmer's field as a stage. In all honestly, in all honesty, I had completely forgotten we were there to smoke and was just so enamored with how pretty it was. As we found a spot to stop and ready our lights to smoke, one friend had the bright idea to exclaim, "Yo, I got a Roman candle." As we all turned to look, they had already gotten out their lighter and was proceeding to light the candle. Again, we were late teens. We were idiots. She proceeds to point to the candle towards the big clearing to the field, every once and a while moving it around so it is not all shooting in the same spot. Going higher and higher into the air, she finally points it into the opposite direction toward the woods. With surprising accuracy, none of the shots actually hit anything before going out until one finally hits a tree near the stream and spirals into the woods where we can't see it. Within no more than a second's time, this blood curdling scream comes from the exact place where the Roman candle bounced into the woods beyond our view. We all completely froze, unsure of what to make of it. As the screams continued on for a worrisome amount of time, I can only describe it as a cross between a deeper version of a howler's monkey roar and an ear ringing whine like an elk's bugle, going higher in pitch as it kept screaming. I remember my ears vibrating from how loud it was. I wanted to cover them, but we were all frozen in place from it. Finally, one of us snapped into reality and yelled, "Run!" and bolted off towards the farmer's field. We all in turn started running away from the ongoing scream from within the woods. As we were running, the scream finally stopped. After about 10 seconds of constant noise, there was no breath or change in the scream apart from pitch. It was able to yell at a volume for longer than I've heard any animal do. I sat I sat the events of this story I sat on the events of this story for about a year, not really sure who to tell or who would believe any of us for that matter. Once I finally felt comfortable talking and researching things similar, I came to the personal conclusion that it might be something along the lines of a skinwalker and started researching further into stories about it, as there is much talk of people having similar encounters in Loeb's Bush. I really wanted to entertain and research any and all possibilities. For me, if this was real and it happened to me, I couldn't disprove anything, and it has vastly changed the way I look at any form of religion or spiritual beliefs. Though friends and through friends and a few events, I know a fair number of indigenous groups and older members that I felt believed enough of the old ways to tell this story. All elders essentially said the same thing along the very blunt line of, "Yep, that sounds like a skinwalker," and a few shared similar encounters that other friends and family had within the last, I think, 2 years. I talked to a few more people about it, and one friend finally recommended I Google what a skinwalker sounded like. I finally looked online and heard some very similar sounds that sent the same "it's watching" chills down my spine, and felt that on top of everything else was enough confirmation for me. To this day, to this day now, I have started my own spiritual path with respect to the lands that I walk on. In addition to the classic "don't whistle" or "say its name at night," I've made it very clear to close friends who have all heard this story that if I ever feel anything similar to being watched or that we shouldn't be in these woods, to get the F out with me. So, this is my story of what I believe was my encounter with a skinwalker. I thought it would be good to share on this sub. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll answer them the best I can. So,
All
what do you
right.
think about that spooky story?
That story was definitely very scary, and I want to say to all the Fright fans who are in the chat room with us here tonight, thank you all for being here. And we have a very special announcement that this coming Friday, we will have another special guest joining us here on the Fright Files to discuss things such as Bigfoot and other weird phenomenon that you may want to know about. And we even have some people in the chat room already that has sent me a few questions here. I'd say hello to Rezi, who wants to know, is Bigfoot real? Yes, Bigfoot is real. He is an interdimensional being who can travel back and forth and maybe even travel through time. We will dive into more of that subject this coming Friday with our special guest as well as in upcoming episodes, as we do episodes coming up on Bigfoot and various things. And I want to say thank you to Madam Mina for such a wonderful, frightful tale we just heard. And that brings us back to what we've been counting down first hand encounters with the black eyed children. And with that being said, here is another story from a first hand witness. This comes from March 17th, 2008, when the witness said, I had one black eyed children and only one encounter. She says, I never heard anything having to do with black eyed kids until I was 12 years old. I was sitting outside of a hairdresser in an old Chevy pickup, waiting for my mom to come to get her hair cut. About 15 minutes had passed, and then I saw some kid walking back and forth along the sidewalk in front of my parked car. Now, at first, I thought I recognized him as one of my friends from school, so I banged on the front windshield until he looked my way. It wasn't not anyone I knew. At this point, I was not scared at all. Not yet. The boy walked over to the side of my car and just stared back at me. I think to, I think to let me get a good look at his eyes, which then freaked me out. He says, let me tell you, if you've never seen a black-eyed kid, you have no idea what to imagine. Pupils as black as the night sky, and the boy whispers, you must let me in. And then I locked the car doors and ducked down into the space below the seats. 5 minutes later, he was gone. When my mother got into the car later, she told me a boy with black eyes had come into the hairdresser and had insisted for my mother to give him the keys. She said she refused. Which brings us to the all important question of the evening: are black eyed kids real? Well, there is no good reason to suspect black eyed children are real. The original sightings go back to 1996, when a newspaper reporter who insisted in, in that he had a strange interest in telling stories of what he experienced. But since that time, we have had so many first-hand encounters with people who claim to have seen the black-eyed children. For instance, in early 2010, a witness who was walking home from work had found herself escorting a young lady to her car. The lady asked, would you escort me to my car? The lady looked a little scared, so we walked towards the car. I tried to coax out of her what she was so worried about. She would only comment about some really creepy looking kids who were following her, being we were in the downtown Seattle area. This could amount to anything, says the witness. So we kept walking towards her car. I kept looking behind us to see if the little kids were behind us. They weren't behind us. Then she grabs my arm really tightly as we walk towards her car. And about half a block in front of us, there were two kids just staring there, looking with their deep black eyes. I made sure I locked eyes with one of them, and I kept in my mind to get the lady to her car. Now, mind you, she says, I don't look like the kind of person who wants to mess around with little kids playing tricks and pranks. Honestly, it's un, unconscious from since I'm a bit shy myself. Finally, I got the woman to her car. She said thanks. I made sure to tell her where the local police station was in case she wanted to report this. So, folks, that's the third and fourth story. That's four stories we have heard tonight of the black eyed kids from first-hand witnesses who have claimed to have seen these children. Now we're going to send it back to Madam Mina. Do you have another scary encounter to tell us or a story?
Let's see, Dr. Fright. I might have one more. Okay, so we have a part 2 update to the Skinwalker story that I read earlier. They say, fast forward some time to, I believe, my second semester reading week. I'm back at home with my friends and back to our same old acts. After a particularly good night of catching up, we decided to revisit Lob's Bush, as none of us had been there since getting caught in the ditch, and the weather was already warm this month with far less snow. I remember feeling almost excited to go back rather than dark impenetrable clouds and snow. Tonight the moon was out and barely needed any flashlights to see where we were going. We parked the car in the same spot, grabbed all necessary smoking apparatuses and a pack of smokes for the driver and me to share, as of course, neither time are we dumb enough to get our designated driver high. As we start walking into the trail, I start realizing landmarks that I had missed from my first time there. With the moonlight making everything more visible, I walked through the same threshold as before and was pleasantly surprised that I didn't feel like I was being watched or unwelcome to walk through. After a point, I had almost forgotten that I was in the infamous woods and was enjoying a late night walk through the forest, laughing with my friends. After walking further down the trail, we finally came to an opening. On the right side, the trees had parted to showcase. Oh, 1 second. After after walking down the trail, we finally came to an opening. The trees had parted out to show the showcase of trees lit by the moonlight. On the left side of the bush, there was a lovely section. Before we could even think, we heard a heavy rustling in the woods as whatever it was took a deep inhale to scream again. The inhale was just as terrifying, sounding like an alligator's bellow mixed with a hyena's laugh. I know both sounds I'm describing are from exhaling, but you could tell this was a guttural, full chested, and preparatory inhale before screaming again, unlike the first scream that almost sounded reactionary. Surprised by the Roman candle almost hitting it. This was clearly an angry roar. Whatever it was really effing big, with the lungs to prove it. And now moving towards us, it was even louder, and I can only assume now was pointed towards us. Even though we were all heavy smokers at the time, we ran as fast as we possibly could without looking back, absolutely terrified from the second continuous roar that was now gaining on us. After about 15 seconds, the scream stopped abruptly. It took us about a second to realize the noise was gone. We turned around to see that we had made it back out of the woods and onto the field. We only looked back briefly to see that we had put about 50 to 100 meters between us and the edge of the bush. Even before we could really think straight, we shakily agreed to make our way to the closest road and make our way back the front of the bush to find where we parked. It was only once we got to the road and caught our smoked out breath did one of us finally ask if we all heard and felt that. We talked briefly, but we were too on edge to actually converse. About 20 minutes later, we finally made it to the back road and had the car in sight. We all started to calm down as we had some time to process and let the adrenaline wear off. We unlocked the car and all got into our respective seats with our bags. None of us had time to take it off before the first scream happened. As the driver finally turned the car on and the headlights flooded the woods in front of us, the front passenger just screamed, "Drive, drive, drive." The driver, without looking, cranked the car into reverse and turned around to back out quickly and go down the back road as fast as he could beside the bush. The friend who screamed started to freak out again. I was sitting directly behind him with my hand on his shoulder from the back seat. As as I began to assess what was wrong, one second. Oh, hold on. I think it cuts off after that. Wait, I think it. Oh, sorry. Okay, I found the spot. The friend who screamed started to freak out all over again. I was sitting directly behind him with my hand on his shoulder from the back seat. As we tried to ask what was wrong, I looked. I was looking over my shoulder to look into the woods. I genuinely felt like time had slowed down as I looked over with the same feeling of something watching me like the first time in the woods. As the trees passed by, I could clearly make out two fully open eyes reflecting back at me. I could clearly make out the two reflective circles. I was completely frozen and I couldn't look away. I couldn't tell if the eyes were locked in on me or the whole vehicle or even what the light they were reflecting off of as we were driving beside the woods. They were clearly further back into the woods by a couple of meters, so I couldn't make out how tall it was, but I could very easily see they were attached to a head much larger and much taller than a human. I completely forgot about comforting the passenger in front of me and instead tried to turn and see it and to see it for longer through the back window as we kept driving, but I had completely lost the visual. I couldn't even make out the sound, but my mind was racing. The longer I sat, the longer I wondered how the hell it got to where I could see it after we had sped away from the parking spot. I don't know how much of it saw the car, but I know it saw me. It saw us all in those woods. I don't know how to describe it other than I was fully prey, and whatever it was a predator that knows me now. After driving a while on our way back to a friend's farm, we were all able to speak about what happened. We all heard the same noises, heard the rustling, heard the far too long screams, and finally the other passenger and I both agreed on seeing the same wide eyes staring at us. Neither of us had gotten a good look at what it was, but we both agreed that it's staring at us was too big to make out. Wait, but both agreed that it's staring at us and it was too big to make out. The passenger also made a comment that even though it was a couple of meters into the woods when he saw it, it had to be much bigger than a human. After a couple of hours more conversing about it, we all felt We all finally felt comfortable driving back to our respective homes. Every couple of months, when we see each other, we'd make certain to each other that we all saw the same thing, as we wanted to make sure that none of us were truly losing it mentally. And that's part two of the Skinwalker story, where they go back to the same place that they did before. What do you think about that, Dr. Fright?
Ah, very, very creepy. I love hearing about skinwalkers, and I love hearing stories of first-hand encounters, which brings us to our final couple of encounters, as we've been discussing the black-eyed children all night, as well as some skinwalker stories. Do you believe in black-eyed children? Put it in the comments. All the witnesses' stories you've heard from first-hand witnesses, none of them have actually believed in black-eyed children until they've seen it firsthand. Which brings me to tonight's final stories on the black-eyed children. And as the witness says, I'd be lying if I told you I didn't know about black-eyed kids before this happened to me. It happened late one summer last year. I definitely did believe. And now in that moment, the idea never crossed my mind. Now see this witness. She did believe in the black-eyed children. And she thought to herself, could this really be happening? And as she says in her story, let me tell you about my neighborhood. You see, I live in a poor part of town, a big ghetto, a bit of the borough of a bit of the lower economic class of a cross section of races. It's LA, Los Angeles. The apartment complex spans a short block. It's dusty brown like the desert we live in. It's got two pools, lots of little Mexican children, and for most part, a pretty friendly population. I'm a destitute writer trying to make it in Hollywood, so I spend my free time writing when this happened. I was working mostly in the mornings and afternoons. I would get home and hit the gym and then settle for an evening in front of the computer. It's pretty common for the evening in the summers to be chaotic around our apartment complex. Kids playing in the pool, ice cream man pushing his cart up and down the sidewalk, woman talking outside the laundry room. Hey, I do my own laundry, says the witness. I'm pretty much the only guy I see here doing it. You know, nice low income, but pleasant like a mixed race of 21st century version of a 50s sitcom. And people will knock on your door, sometimes to borrow something I cook. So neighbors pop up to find out the origins of the great aromas from my kitchen window. Sometimes for a little help working on a broken down car, but mostly it's kids selling candy bars or Christmas wrapping paper, or jittery tweakers selling magazine subscriptions, or old Mexican men selling bootleg DVDs. But it's hot out here. Leave my window open, and the air conditioner isn't cheap. I've got no money, remember? Hoping for the cross breeze. That means, though, I can't see anyone from where I sit and work. I can hear them very clearly as they walk up to my door. And that's when it happened. One night, I heard someone knock. I answered it. Besides buying the occasional candy bar, I smile politely, decline, wish them a nice day, and send them off. No big deal. That evening, it was quiet, which was strange in and of itself. I should at least have been able to hear the distant sound of rancho music. I heard a couple of people walk up to my door. I'm not the first apartment in my courtyard, so usually I hear the salespeople as they knock on my neighbor's door and work their way around to me. Not this time, Whoever it was walked right up to my door and knocked. I got up to answer it, reaching for the door handle when a chill went through my body like I've never experienced before. A cold tightness in my chest. I halted my hand movement towards the door handle and placed it flat on the door as I was feeling for the heat from a fire. I have a peephole on my door, but it never crossed my mind to use it. I stood there with my hand flat on the door, listened. They knocked again. I don't scare easily, and I wasn't exactly afraid, but I was having a visual experience all over my body. A base fear reaction, just like I could hear them, and they had heard me move to the door. They knew I was inside. Yes, I said, "Who is it? Who is it?" A boy's voice answered, "We need to use your phone, please." Yes, that's not going to happen. I started laughing. I stress laugh when I'm in a pain or under pressure. They heard me laugh, and neither of us moved for about a minute or two. A really, really long minute or two. Then finally, they walked away, not to any other of the 8 doorways. Within 15 feet, not to ask anyone else, before they could have gone more than a dozen yards. Curiously, resorted itself, and I yanked the door open, running after them to see who it was and where they were headed. The courtyard of my complex was completely empty afterwards. I thought the experience I thought the experience fit the stories about the black-eyed kids, and I kicked myself for not opening the door. Coming face to face with black-eyed kids? How cool would that have been, says the witness. But then I remembered that feeling, my skin crawling, and the certain knowledge in me at that moment. There was no way in heck I was going to open that door. I hope you enjoy that frightful story of the black eyed children. I hope you enjoyed a very, very frightful evening. And as the comments say, black eyed children scare me, but very interesting. And here's an interesting comment from John Stewart saying that Bigfoot Sasquatch is very real. I have seen 2 of them. We would love to hear more of your Bigfoot story. Perhaps one day coming up, you could tell us your story live on camera. We would love to hear it. And as John also says, never let those kids in your house, home, or car. Not good. Madamina, how did you enjoy these frightful tales of the black eyed children?
Very, very spooky. I am very thankful I have not encountered them yet.
I have not encountered the black eyed children myself yet, but should either one of us get a knock on the door, kids asking to use the telephone.
Nope.
This has been a very frightful evening. With that being said, Madamina, should we hear one more story before the night comes to
Well,
a close?
if you have one, I'm all ears. I'm all out of stories.
This final story of the evening. You see, it was a cold October evening, not too far off from Halloween. As the witness says, I remember sitting in my room playing the original Nintendo. The evening was slowly creeping by, so I decided to go to the corner store. It was only 3 blocks. Shouldn't be much trouble, right? During my walk, I see the normal. The occasional person putting up Halloween decorations and kids playing in their yards. But this story is about something far more sinister. You see, I remember seeing two teens about the age of 14 knocking on doors, asking to use telephones. Of course, I thought that was weird because most teens these days already have phones, right? As I kept walking, they stopped and stared at me for a short moment. I felt the blood in my veins, the chill running down my spine. I felt so creeped out. I hurried to the next block. The next block seemed fine until I looked behind me and saw the two teens were following me. So I took off sprinting towards the store at this point. I saw the sign for the store, and what a relief washed over me. I opened the door and I told the cashier about what had happened on the way here. He looked at me slightly creeped out and told me a story about this happening to him in his hometown and how they found him the day he left and asked for his help. In an emotionless voice, he told me to never, ever agree to help the children. He told me another story, but at that point, I was no longer paying attention because they were standing at the door asking to be let in, and the cashier freaked out, locked the doors. You see, folks, whether you believe in the black eyed children or not, one thing is for certain. When you listen to all of these first hand encounters, you have to wonder, how can everybody who's making accounts of seeing black eyed children give the same details and descriptions about two kids asking to use the phone, about two kids needing to call their mother? These were the stories of the black eyed children. And we also heard two fascinating tales, or a fascinating tale from Madamina on skinwalkers. This has been the most fascinating, frightful night we have had in a while here on the Fright Files. And as you know, each story gets more and more frightful as we go down the line. I want to thank everybody in the chat room who was here and helped us, and everybody out there watching who also helps by becoming fans of the Fright Files. And a big thank you, most of all, goes out to Madamina for her frightful tales and her frightful voice. As the Fright Files gets ready this coming Friday night, we have a very special guest who will be discussing Sasquatch and other interesting details. I'm looking forward to having this guest on, and I'm sure Madamina is as well. Do you have any final words, Madamina, before we depart back to our Dungeon of Doom?
Nope, but just stay spooky.
Yes, everybody, stay spooky and always remember, before you watch the Fright Files, ask yourself, can you make it to the end? And most importantly, in my final parting words, when two kids knock at your door, never let them in.